Stay tuned. Ahead, I'll talk with Dr. Anthony Rostain about You're Not Done Yet, Parenting Young Adults in an Age of Uncertainty. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and this is Some Books Considered. Dr. Anthony Rostain is a nationally recognized expert in child and adolescent psychiatry, and you can learn more about Dr. Rostain in the description below. His previous books include The Stressed Years of Their Lives, which he co-wrote with Janet Hibbs. Hibbs also co-wrote You're Not Done Yet. Dr. Rostain, welcome to Some Books Considered.
Thanks so much for having me.
In the introduction to your book, you talk about this is a new era for parents. So what has changed? I know society has changed. The economics of a young person starting out has changed over the decades. So tell us about what you observed and what encouraged you and your co-author to write this book.
Well, sure. I mean, look, we all grew up at an earlier time in history when the expectation was that once you sent your child off to college or post-secondary education, that they were going to go and get launched, and that would be it. I mean, they would sort of check in, but, they would really be on their own. So what we called the markers of adulthood, which were developed in the 1950s, we've come to understand those markers, those milestones are out of date in terms of the timing. And so we see the overwhelming majority of people in this age group, their 20s, really are taking a lot longer to reach that independent stage. The 5 markers are finishing your education, finding a career path, becoming financially independent, finding a partner, and having a child. Those were the 5 indicators. Now, apart from finding a child or having a child, which is something that more and more young people are delaying, we know that. Even the other markers are delayed. And so this was the first realization we've had that over the last 20 years, we see this more and more, that our patients and their families are dealing with a new reality. And oftentimes parents feel that they did something wrong. They feel ashamed. What's wrong? My young person is back at home, or they're not home, but I'm still supporting them to a great extent. What do I do? Now, the factors that went into this predate the pandemic, but the pandemic certainly accelerated it. For one thing, it became clear that having a good career took longer. You really needed a longer time to prepare. Secondly, the job market has changed, and the availability of certain kinds of jobs has become more competitive with the global economy. Thirdly, as you pointed out, housing has gotten more expensive. And so it's harder to afford living on your own. And then, of course, the college degree itself, for those that pursue it, has become quite expensive, to the point where it's now a political issue, as you're aware, that, doing something about the student loans, which really burden young people well into their 30s and beyond. So all of this got us to think about the fact that we needed to write a guide for parents, because unfortunately there are lots of guides for parents of young kids or even for parents of adolescents, but we realized there wasn't a good way to help parents of young adults navigate these complicated waters.
And it seems that it's complicated in a lot of different ways. I mean, there may be just kids who are having trouble getting out on their own because of a lot of the reasons you've just mentioned. And then there will be other young adults who are actually dealing with problems that need to be solved before they can move out. That's right. And let's talk about the kids that maybe aren't dealing with extraordinary problems, but I think for the parent, it becomes difficult to navigate. How do I respect them as adults, but yet at the same time provide some parenting for them? And that seems like that's a delicate balance.
That is the delicate balance. Well, the take-home message of the book is learn to listen more and try not to be judgmental, or use your own milestones when you were their age as a guide for looking at how they're doing. We kind of talk about a new mindset, resetting our expectations so that parents aren't constantly either frustrated or concerned or feeling worried and guilty for something they didn't do right. So the take home is, and the book spends the first half of the book, we spend time talking with parents about why this has come about, how to go about listening better so that your young person is more comfortable sharing the frustrations or the, whatever they're facing that is making it hard for them to achieve their goals. Now, one important area that is drastically different is social media and the internet, because this was not around when most parents were growing up. And this is now dominating the social ecology that we live in. So what do you do if you're a parent and you see your young person spending a lot of time on the silver screen? At what point do you become concerned? And that's something we deal with in the book. Learning what's going on for the young person with their social media self. How are they spending their time? And you're probably aware there's a lot more research going into now being published about the negative effects of extraordinary time, excessive time on the internet. So we do talk about internet use disorder or problematic internet use, because we're worried, like young people are falling into a trap. They find a lot of things good about it, as do we all, right? It's great to be able to communicate, and certainly during the pandemic, it was a lifesaver to be able to reach out and talk to people and learn about what was going on. But what happens with especially vulnerable young people is that they almost live their entire lives online and aren't getting away. So we talk a lot about talking with your young person about how are they deciding, how are they setting limits. Trying to set limits for them doesn't work. Okay, because they'll find a way around it. But having a frank conversation and actually looking at yourself as a parent, how are you handling the constant distractions and the dopamine blast that you get from seeing something online? I mean, we all have to learn to live with this technology. As I like to say to my patients, either you master the technology or it will master you. And I think these are very important conversations for parents and young people to have.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. What are the danger signs, things we should be looking out for that would indicate that our young adult is having difficulty with how they're managing digital media?
Well, the first question to ask is this something that your young person is willing to talk about with you? And if they're not, you can say, look, I'm going to share my concerns about my own media use. I've noticed it's really hard. And actually sort of asking the young person to help you with your own concerns might be a way to start, because that makes you more equal with one another. I think in this realm in particular, it's an adult-adult conversation. Okay, so if I were to talk to you, Don, about your media use, I'd start off by saying, hey, I'm noticing I have trouble turning off the device at night when I'm trying to go to bed. What have you learned about that? And what do you learn, like putting in the framework of what are you learning about this? How are you making the decisions? What are the traps that you've seen yourself get into? Because here are the traps that I have. And beginning that way, rather than thinking you have to micromanage or look and see and, I caught you, you stayed up later than you thought. The second thing would be to kind of look at the media diet. How much time is productive, how much time is recreational, and how much time becomes wasted time. And the wasted time is when even the young person or you would agree, hey, this has gone beyond what I intended. Because we think of a day as having 24 hours. You need so many hours to sleep. You need so many hours for self-care. And then what's left over for work/recreation. And then when that becomes unbalanced, and I'd say the biggest marker of the disturbance that we would call internet use disorder is that the person is spending less time sleeping than they need, is not spending time out away from the screen, is constantly engaged in the screen and not in the world around them, and isn't getting important obligations taken care of, whether it's job-related, studying, or just even participating in social life with the family and with their friends. And once it begins to go down that path, it's not long before people start to realize, oh my God, I'm really, really trapped. And that's when we begin to say, okay, how can we roll the tape back a little bit and start to set limits? And limit setting is tough, but it's very, very possible to do. And in fact, your young person probably knows better than you do how to set controls on how much time. And I think once you set controls on the time you spend, I don't think you have to worry about what you're doing on it. It's really the total time spent that counts. If you're spending too much time, that you're not exercising, you're not eating properly, you're not sleeping enough, and you're not doing things that are recreational and productive off the screen, then I think we've got a problem that needs discussion.
I'm talking with Dr. Anthony Rostain about You're Not Done Yet, Parenting Young Adults in an Age of Uncertainty, and our conversation continues in a moment. If you appreciate this discussion, please take a moment to subscribe, like, and click on the bell so you'll know when I post new interviews with authors here on Some Books Considered. And thank you. Beyond social media and the digital use, there are other problems that a young person might be facing that's hindering them from moving on. So I know this is a very broad area, but what are some of the other signs a parent might look toward in seeing if there is a problem here that they might need some professional help with?
Well, let's start with just what I see. I'm an expert in ADHD and in people with neurodevelopmental differences, and how they need accommodations to, get the daily job done. What's happened is that we call them executive functioning skills. The skill to get up, plan your day, get from here to there fairly efficiently, prioritize, manage time, deal with distractions, and deal with setbacks without, losing it. All of those we call executive functioning skills. I've noticed that it's not just my patients that are having trouble with this. It's many, many young people are saying, they don't know how to manage their time. They don't know how to get from here to there fairly efficiently. So first thing I would ask parents to consider is your young person wasting a lot of time? And of course, the social media could be the culprit, but it isn't just social media. It's their capacity, in essence, to look and see and develop a daily planner, some sort of routine. I get up, I do this, and then I go into that. I mean, literally, we don't do well. Humans don't do well without structure and a schedule. So if your young person is not following a regular schedule, a daily kind of plan that gets them through the day, I think that's something to be concerned about. Now, beyond the executive functions, and by the way, there are tools out there to learn how to do this. There are devices that help you manage time better. I could go on and on. It's a whole industry now in coaching, but I don't think parents should be doing the coaching, because then you get locked into a parent-child struggle rather than an adult-to-adult conversation. So I think finding coaches where possible, peers oftentimes can do this. And again, how do you get through the day with relative efficiency? Now, the other set of questions that come up that are concerns have to do with anxiety disorders and depression. And it looks to us that right now, the most stressed out, anxious generation by far are people in this 20-year-old age group, okay? They are reporting record amounts of anxiety about the future, about their own safety, about the world's safety, and they are really struggling to deal with all of these feelings of being threatened all the time. So we think, again, addressing that in a straightforward way. What's making you anxious? Is it reaching the level of what we would call an anxiety disorder? Then at that point, we would say, it's important to get some professional help. And this can come in many forms. There is online therapy that can be useful, all kinds of really good structured therapies, and which we discuss in the book. There are ways to help people instead of being globally anxious about everything, focusing on what you do have control over, putting aside the things you can't control in order to develop a strategy that grounds you in the things that you can influence day to day. So anxiety, depression, and, in some ways we've seen rises in alcohol use since the pandemic in this group. So worrying about substance use as well. Any of those things we think need parental guidance to get help. Finally, and this is the most important message of the book, is that whatever help your young adult is getting, you're part of their support system. And so it's important that the professional they're working with check in with you and, if possible, even invite you into some of the conversations. It's not to say that a young adult doesn't need privacy to talk about how upset they are. Maybe they're upset with you. But the idea here is that parents should be welcomed into the therapeutic conversation and rather than excluded.
Well, and obviously communication is important here as we're trying to figure out, what's going on in the life of our young adult. But I think also we'll need to be careful about the language we use, the words we choose, because there might be a tendency to slip back into old modes of communication and talk with them as if they were children instead of talking with them as a young adult.
That's a very insightful question. We oftentimes lapse back into seeing the young person, the young adult as a child. So listening to yourself and saying to yourself, hey, if I were 20-something, how would I want my parents to talk to me? And I think the language ought to be one of mutual respect, of literally listening and understanding their experience. The goal is not to be a manager or even a coach. If the young person wants your help, great. If they say, hey, I'm having trouble learning how to, balance a budget or look at, making even, young people oftentimes don't even know how to write checks. They do everything electronically. But the point is that if they want help, certainly to be available for it, but not to offer help before it is sought. So I'd say that the language ought to be one of, say, listen, I'm wondering what's going on with X or Y. Do you feel comfortable sharing what's happening? Let's sit down if you're having difficulties and let me hear about them if you're willing to tell me. On the plus side, by the way, we have seen that young people and their parents are closer than ever. So here's the interesting point. You don't have to worry about, if your young person doesn't want to talk to you, it doesn't mean they don't love you or care about you. It just may be a topic area that they're not comfortable with. So pick something that they are comfortable with. And most of all, share your own, what your life is about right now. How do you balance your needs for, being successful at one domain, but also being able to relax, take it easy in other areas. So I would say it's a sharing process. The language ought to be one of, now that you're an adult, I'm interested in your opinion. How do you see this? How do you see, and doing things that are fun together, watching movies, any kind of sports, the things that parents and young people enjoy doing, you ought to make sure you plan time. It's really time in with one another. Finally, and this is really the most dicey thing of all, if your young person has come back home to live with you and you're having them as a house, and now they're your housemate. They're your kid, but they're also your housemate. So how do you begin to discuss sharing responsibility for chores, for finances, and setting up what's comfortable for everybody in the way of expectations? Because again, going in and because they're sleeping late, that doesn't mean you should go in there and wake them up. Okay, that's not your job. Your job is to set up an understanding amongst everybody about how life is going to be, and then respecting that they have their life and they're figuring things out.
Well, there's so much in this book that we've just scratched the surface. So to learn more, the book is You're Not Done Yet: Parenting Young Adults in an Age of Uncertainty by B. Janet Hibbs and Anthony Rostain. Dr. Rostain, thank you for talking with me today.
Well, thank you for having me. Delighted to listen to what you had to say as well. It's very, very thoughtful questions.
Now, if you'd like to purchase You're Not Done Yet, I've placed a link for you in the description below. And if you'd like to see more videos about books and their authors on a wide variety of topics, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. I'm Dan Skinner. Thank you for watching this edition of Some Books Considered.